Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and today's review is going to be the Lake People G111mk2 headphone amplifier. This is a $599 US product that here in the United States is available through Power Holdings Inc., and I will put a link where you can buy down in the description. This was a self-funded unit. I have no affiliation with Lake People, and so all of the opinions you are about to hear me say are mine and mine alone. So we'll go ahead and do shameless self-promotion, and then we will come right back and get into the review. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Please remember to hit that like button, and if you haven't, please subscribe. Also, I have a Patreon set up so that you can help support me on a monthly basis, and I've set up a PayPal donation so that you can help me out in that way too if a monthly subscription does not make sense for you. Links for all of that, including the benefits, in the description below. Please check those out. All right, on with the show. The G111mk2, as I said in the intro, is a $599 US headphone amplifier from German maker Lake People. All right, if this seems to be giving you a little bit of deja vu, it should. I reviewed the Mark I, which I actually have right here, back, I think it was sometime late in 2021, and so I will put a link to that video in the description below. And I have held on to the Mark I unit here all throughout this year, just kind of using it as a mid-fi reference headphone amplifier, because if you watched my review of the Mark I, that is basically what I thought of it, is that it is a really high quality, like reference caliber piece at what was, I think this one was $550 US when it was the model that was their mid-fi piece. So here, late in 2022, comes the Mark II. And I filmed this in early November, and I think this was released maybe late September-ish, somewhere in there. I've had this in for somewhere in the 5 to 6 week range, and have been using it as part of some of my headphone reviews as of late too, which ought to be a little bit of a preview as to what's to come. If you've been watching some of my headphone reviews lately, this one has shown up. All right, so let's dig into what is it. So this is a headphone amplifier here right at $600 US that is kind of aimed more towards the professional market for studio use and that kind of a thing, but it also works very well for home use. And so I will be evaluating it mostly as a home use headphone amp there at the $600 price point. So features and specs, and we'll do a unit tour and that sort of thing. So most of the build, in fact, I'll hold it up here too, and you can see just how very similar these two units are, with the Mark I on top and the Mark II here on the bottom. I mean, we see on the front panels, both have what I think is an identical, or at least like just a refreshed version of an Alps RK27 potentiometer on both of them. So you do get kind of that, hopefully you heard that, that kind of clickiness to the volume control there. All right, then we also see that, you know, generally Spartan front panels where we have on each unit a twin pair of 6.35 millimeter single-ended headphone outputs, and then we have a volume, or not, excuse me, not a volume, but we just have a power button on the front of each one, and there is a blue LED that lights up fairly brightly when these things are powered on. And then other than that, I mean, just kind of almost a matte black finish here on the front, and basically just the wording changes a little bit, where the Mark I was called a high performance headphone amplifier, low noise, low THD, high output power, okay? And then this, the Mark II is now a superior headphone amplifier. That's the claim on the front anyway. We'll get into that in a minute. Okay, but otherwise the build of these units is fairly similar. You see they have pretty much the same height. They have the same width. There is a little bit of difference here in the depth of the build, with the Mark II being, you know, deeper in build here, at least on the front, okay? Back panel, we see that they are pretty much the same here again too, where we have the power input, which is user switchable from the 115 volt here in the US to 230 volts elsewhere. Okay, we have balanced 3-pin XLR analog input, we have unbalanced single-ended RCA input, and we have a button here on either unit. So this is a holdover. Okay, on the back, you get this selector button right here to switch between the two inputs. So that, and there are 5 gain stages on the Mark II, but they are only accessible internally. So in a lot of ways, with the input on the back, you need to choose an input and stick with it unless it's easy to reach behind the unit and however you have it set up if you want to use the analog input, and then you just kind of have to pick a gain stage and set it. Whatever the stock gain stage is it arrived with, I used. Okay, for this review, I did not open the unit up and look inside on that. All right, you do get a lot of output power. This actually has the same output power specs as the Mark I. So just really quickly, just to know that there's plenty of it, you get 600 milliwatts of output at 600 ohms, 900 milliwatts at 300 ohms, 1750 milliwatts at 100 ohms, and 1200 milliwatts at 32 ohms. Why is that not a linear fall off as impedance increases? Lake People does their, you do a 60 volt throughput, so the entire internal operation is at 60 volts. There's a nice big toroidal transformer in here, and they really work hard to maximize the output power, specifically voltage for high impedance cans like the 300 ohm Sennheisers and the 250 ohm and 600 ohm Beyerdynamics, so just for example on those. However, it also does a fairly good job of delivering current to lower impedance planars and that sort of thing. So this really by spec and honestly by ear can drive just about everything out there, from very sensitive IEMs all the way up to pretty hard to drive inefficient planar magnetic headphones. Okay, so what changed from the Mark I to the Mark II internally? Honestly, I don't know. I asked Arthur at Power Holdings, and he said he would ask Lake People, and I just haven't heard back from them yet. If and when I do hear back from them, I will probably summarize what they say and pin a comment below this video so that that information makes it out there. However, I don't think, other than just being interesting how they changed the internals here, I don't think there's, I don't think we need to know that to evaluate this product sonically. And there are some definite differences between the Mark I and the Mark II that I will get to in the comparison section after I talk about the sound of this thing. All right, so other than that and the general build quality, I think we are pretty ready to get into that sound description, honestly. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. I mean, build, again, small compact unit, fits on most desks pretty well. Okay, sound. I plugged so many things into this. So for DAC use, I used mostly the Schiit Bifrost 2/64 version, connected via balanced output into this, and then my Berkeley Alpha Series 2 DAC to really see how this thing scales up, which is also connected to a Singer SU2 digital-to-digital converter, which then goes USB into my computer. So those were the DAC sources for this mostly. I also tried, I think I used the, yes, this is a true statement. I did check the DAC output of the Hibby RS6 digital audio player using a 4.4 millimeter Penacon to dual XLR cable, and checked that in here too. So that was another DAC source. Let's see, the headphones that I plugged into this thing are manifold. Like, there are so many of them. Let's see if I can remember them all. I just went through a list, but probably helps to do it by type. Low impedance dynamics that I plugged into this include Focal Radiance, the JM mods of the HER9 that I just reviewed, so I will put a link to those down below. I think those, both sets of those are 32 ohm, pretty high efficiency. Also, a friend loaned to me a Focal Utopia, the original, as I await delivery of a new Utopia for review. I'll have that on hand to compare with, and I tried that in here. That's kind of like yeah, a middle to high impedance, depending on where you are in the frequency spectrum, headphone. So that got plugged into here for a little bit. Let's see. High impedance dynamics. I did my 600 ohm biodynamic DT880, which is balanced modded, and I did my 300 ohm Sennheiser HD6XX in here as well. Let's see. High efficiency planars that I plugged in here would be the Hi-Fi-Min Ananda Stealth Magnet Edition and G111mk2 SE. Kind of a middle of the road efficiency planar would be my Audeze LCD2 pre-phaser, revision 1. And then hard to drive planars would be two Hi-Fi-Mins, the HE6SEV2 and the Susvara, which, it's right there, okay, and the Susvara. All right, and then let's see, I think at some point I also plugged in my Kohler kitchen sink at this point, because there's just so much stuff that I plugged in here, all that. Now, sound signature. I mean, the frequency response comes across as basically studio neutral, much like the Mark I does, with just a hint of warmth and smoothness. And I think the Mark II does just a slightly more gentle roll-off in the high treble there too. Not to the point where you're going to observe a roll-off in a 20 to 20, 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz frequency sweep in a graph there, but the treble presence is just not quite what I think the Mark I was, okay, but it's a very small, very subtle change. Okay, so that's from a frequency response standpoint, but the other features of the Mark I sound are here. Like, there is a lot of macrodynamic impact. Okay, so a lot of punch, a lot of slam, a lot of snappy dynamics through the mid-range, and that sort of thing. There is a pretty wide and fairly holographic spatial presentation here. So there's a fairly big, not huge, but reasonably big soundstage with pretty accurate imaging and separation in the spatial presentation. Okay, so sounds are placed very well, and then there's a fairly good sense of space in between sonic images, both this way and also in a bit of a sense of depth there too, with the layering and that sort of thing. All right, the timbre, I think here, like Lake People to my ear, as good as their amps have been, and we're talking Lake People and the Bioelectric series, of which I've heard a fair number now, like, have always been okay on timbre. It's never really been a strength, but the timbre here kind of jumped out at me as being a step forward for the Lake People brand and making voices and instruments and all that sound just a little bit more natural than they have on previous versions. All that. So I think that's good, and was something that got my attention as an interesting development moving forward with Lake People. Let's see. What else do we need to talk about there? The resolution also. Pretty good resolution for $599 US. Like, there was a lot of subtle stuff, a lot of micro detail being resolved in the signal, like room reverbs, ghost notes, that sort of thing. There was a lot of texturing in the bass, and you could hear a lot of the finger action happening on bass guitar strings, and you could hear a lot of the rosinousness, the zizzy sound of bows being dragged across strings on stringed instruments like violins and cellos and things like that. Okay, so very little to complain about here. Like, again, it's still mostly going for a neutral presentation because studio use, okay, professional use, but there is just a hint of warmth and smoothness to it that make it enjoyable and pleasing to listen to as well, despite the fact that you're getting a lot of resolution and a really good spatial presentation and a lot of dynamic impact. Okay, so just really compelling sonic package, I think, here at $600 on its own, which really shouldn't be surprising, because I called the Mark I, like, for the topping fans of the world and all that, I really thought that the Mark I was what you thought you were buying when you bought the A90, the topping A90, okay, at least the original. And I think by and large that is still true. If you are buying one of those near perfect measuring high feedback op amp bass headphone amplifiers that are out there, like the toppings and the THXs of the world and all of that, you know, around $500 to $600 anymore. Like this gives you the performance that I think that you think you are buying from one of those units. But this just brings out a lot more of the subtle details in a more realistic, natural, and believable and refined way than those do there. So really excellent sonic package here. Really good. Right. In fact, I will be keeping this one and trying to move the G111. So I might get somebody a good deal on the Mark 1. Excuse me. They're both the G111. So let's dive into the comparison here, more in depth between these two here for a moment. All right, and then I will briefly mention some comparisons with units from other brands, as I think there's some interesting info there. Okay. So with the power output specs being pretty much the same, and I think they are rated for the same power output, the Mark II has noticeably better control through the entire frequency spectrum. Like bass here is just tighter, and like it's the decay, not just in the bass, but through the entire frequency range, is just a little bit quicker and more realistic and natural to my ear. So there's just more control exerted over the driver in the Mark II than there is from the Mark I. So the Mark I can sound just a little bit bloated through the mid-bass and sloppy in comparison to the Mark II. It's not that way in an absolute sense, just in comparison to the Mark II. That's how it comes across to my ear. Now, you also get more refined and defined spatial imaging and separation out of the Mark II. The Mark I sounds a little bit more blended together in its spatial presentation, like, and not necessarily in a good way. Like I've mentioned, like comparing the, oh, it's not up there, but the Hi-Fiman HE1000 SE to the HE1000 V2. That the SE's spatial presentation sounded a little bit more blended together, but it did it in a natural way. Here, the more blended together in the Mark I spatially compared to the Mark II just makes this one sound a little bit more like muddy and blobby and like slurred together and not more natural on that too. Now, the combination of a little bit less driver control and a little bit less coherent spatial presentation in the Mark I as compared to the Mark II does a couple of things that I think are psychoacoustic effects more than not. One, the Mark I at least initially presents as having a little bit bigger soundstage, but when I ear squint and really pay attention, the staging here is the same size basically. Like it has basically the same boundaries, both width, height, depth, both of three things, right? Okay, in all of width, height, and depth. But it's again just the added refinement and accuracy and coherence of the Mark II over that. I think just it kind of masks a little bit. It doesn't sound as big initially. You kind of have to listen for it. Okay, I hope that makes sense. All right, and then also with just the added control here, it just overall sounds more refined and defined and subtly detailed. It can pull out a little bit more. So it just creates an overall more believable, realistic sound. I think some will interpret the slightly sloppier mid-bass on the Mark II, the Mark I, as it being a little bit more mid-bass forward and having a little bit more punch in the mid-bass. Kick drums, this was all over in my notes, like kick drums just have a quicker, tighter thump to them on the Mark II than they do on the Mark I. So it doesn't come across as being as bassy because the sound, like it decays a little bit quicker. It's just a little bit tighter and a little bit faster, but there's still a good healthy whoomp to it when it hits. And then you also you hear the higher pitch sound of like the mallet hitting the skin of the kick drum and that sort of thing coming through on the Mark II that you don't get on the Mark I as well. So to sum up the comparison here between the two G111s, what you get from the Mark II over the Mark I is just a subtle improvement in just about every technical sonic category. You get more control over the driver. You get subtly better spatial separation and imaging. You get subtly better vocal and instrument separation, like vocals from each other and instruments from each other. You get subtly better detail retrieval. You get about the same amount of macrodynamic impact, which was already high and impressive, but because of the added control, might come across initially as not quite as much as the Mark I and the Mark II. But put all of those things together, plus suddenly Lake People is like sounding more convincing in this unit on the timbre to my ear, and you just get a product that subtly better than the Mark I in all of those areas. Like, those small differences over several areas add up, and you just get a more believable, more coherent, more realistic, and to my ear, more enjoyable sound out of the Mark II. And that's saying something, because I thought the G111 Mark I was and is an excellent, excellent mid-fi headphone amplifier. The Mark II is just a legitimate improvement. Okay? It really is. So round of applause to Lake People and the team of engineers over there, and Fried Ream, okay, the lead designer over there who came up with this. Like, sounds great. Really nice job. Now, I do want to address comparisons with some other similarly priced units here real quick, but I need to go get them to show them to you, and I think that's going to be some interesting info in there for a later video. So give me 1 second to go get those, and I will be right back. All right, I am back. Now, if you've been watching my channel here and watching my reviews for a while, you know that I love to do comparisons between like products whenever possible, and similarly priced products at that, because I think that's where we really can understand the value of each piece when we start talking about where it fits into a market context. In this particular case, talking about new-ish $599 US headphone amplifiers, I'm going to ask you for some patience, because I have a pretty cool opportunity here that not only do I have the Lake People G111 Mark II, which is of course the subject of this video, in here, I have some other cool things too. Apos Audio sent to me the topping A90D headphone amplifier, which is, I mean, all of these are going to be $599 USD. So a review of this is going to be coming up very soon. Apos also sent me the Singer SA1, $599 US headphone amplifier. So review of this coming up very soon. And then a friend of the channel very graciously agreed to pick up and have sent here the Schiit Lear, is it Lear or Lyre? Anyway, the Schiit, I'm just going to go Lear for now. The Schiit Lear Plus, okay, $599 US hybrid tube headphone amplifier. So there we go. Very soon you're going to get 3 reviews of other $599 headphone amps, and then after that I will do a shootout video where I do an in-depth comparison of the Lake People G111 Mark II, the topping A90D, the Singer SA1, and the Schiit Lear Plus. Okay, so that is coming up in the near future. So in terms of comparing the Lake People G111 Mark II to other headphone amplifiers from other brands, I'm just going to beg for your patience, but there's going to be a cool video coming up in the near future. All right, so I will go ahead and leave it there. Seriously, the G111 Mark II, excellent. It took an already very good mid-fi headphone amplifier, made it even better. I'm going to be happy to hang on to this one for a while and use it as my new mid-fi headphone amp reference, unless one of these other 3 that I just showed you jumps in there and shows itself to be even better. All right. I am Wave Theory. Thanks for watching this video. If you haven't liked yet, hit that like button. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. Please check out my Patreon so you can support me on a monthly basis and get some fun benefits. Link in the description. If a monthly subscription does not make sense for you, please see my PayPal, link in the description, where you can give me a one-time donation to help me keep doing cool content like this. And as always, enjoy the music.